Hello, I'm Alan Brown. This week, I'd like to reflect on what the Audience Outlook Monitor research says about how comfortable people feel about going out to different kinds of performance venues, and just brainstorm a bit about the short-term and long-term future of our theaters and concert halls. Specifically, I invite you to think about how we can reimagine spaces in order to bring audiences back into a new habit of attendance. Let's get right to our first graph. Here we see how comfortable audiences say they'd be attending different types of cultural facilities today, assuming they were open and following health safety guidelines. Along the bottom, you'll see results for cohorts of organizations in Boston, San Francisco, Chicago, Cincinnati, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. The yellow diamonds represent comfort levels visiting large theaters and concert halls, while the purple triangles represent comfort levels with outdoor venues. And you can clearly see a greater level of comfort with outdoor venues, although still on the lower end of the scale overall. The next chart similarly illustrates comfort levels attending venues that hold different numbers of people. Here we see a strong preference for smaller venues with 50 or 100 people, even with social distancing guidelines in effect. It's interesting to note here that the largest gap in comfort is between venues that seat between 100 and 500 people. At a very basic level, we understand this to mean that people will feel comfortable with fewer bodies in a space. The next chart suggests that 2/3 of audiences across all our cities say that they'll put on masks and adhere to distancing guidelines in order to attend our venues, and another 30% said maybe. Only 10% say they won't cooperate with masks and distancing. This gives us a glimmer of hope that when we feel we can safely reopen, people will be willing to work with us. To me, this looks like a bright green light inviting us to innovate in terms of space design. Finally, I'll share with you just one response to an open-ended follow-up question about why some people might not be ready to attend cultural venues. In general, the open-ended comments people are sharing through the survey are lengthy and highly articulate about what people are willing or not willing to do and why. Often they use scientific language in their answers. They understand the comparative risks of surface transmission versus airborne transmission, and based on their comments, I think it's safe to say that many, if not most of our audience members closely follow the news and are constantly educating themselves about the epidemiology of COVID-19. They're extremely knowledgeable consumers with a high appetite for information, and these are the people we're designing for. Over the years, scholars have written much about the symbolic meanings that our cultural facilities take on beyond their functional purpose. My concern, quite frankly, is with COVID that our large theaters and concert halls are taking on a problematic symbolic meaning, namely that they're becoming tacitly understood as dangerous places to be. I think public officials signal this when they say that theaters will be the last thing to reopen. And now with scientists saying that the virus is aerosolized, the prospects of sitting in confined spaces for long periods of time with poor ventilation really leads many people to a very dark place. In sufficient time, of course, fear of enclosed spaces will subside. But the real question is, what do we do in the meantime? Because the meantime might be 6 months, or it might be a year, or it might be longer than that. Just as our communities have diversified demographically, so must our cultural spaces diversify. It's a long overdue transformation because the inventory of facilities in a community is slow to change. But arts groups have long needed more flexible, more configurable spaces that allow them to offer artistic work in a range of formats that speak to a range of audiences, including people who don't feel welcome at conventional venues. We have the design and engineering capabilities. We have the technologies for quickly raising temporary structures. If China can build a hospital in 10 days, can't we raise temporary cultural venues in a month or two? The real question is, do we have the will to design new spaces that are radically inclusive, spaces that welcome people from all walks of life? We might refashion existing spaces, much like the Wilma Theater has done in Philadelphia. Or we might convert our stages and lobbies into small venues, or even build new venues within larger venues like warehouses or armories, or raise tented or inflatable structures in city parks, or yes, even convert old drive-in theaters. In short, we need to create spaces that shift the psychological focus away from the risk of virus transmission and instead reassert that cultural spaces can be fun, safe, and inclusive. There isn't enough capital for every arts organization to reimagine their space. But working together at the community level, we very well might be able to address this challenge in partnership with businesses and funders. In designing temporary spaces, we very well might create more permanent solutions to broadening the audience for all kinds of cultural programs. Thank you.